The elevator door slid open, and there he was, just a janitor, mop forgotten, singing like he owned the building. My daughter was finally asleep upstairs because of him. And in that moment, I had to decide, do I fire him, or do I let him save us both? The penthouse had the kind of silence money buys, thick, engineered, a hush pressed between triple-glazed glass and discreet vents. Sarah stood in it like a trespasser, arms folded across a robe she'd never had time to wear, watching the city stutter with faraway sirens and red pinpricks of brake lights. 3 nights without sleep had rearranged her sense of distance. The skyline felt close enough to touch, and her own heartbeat sounded like a neighbor knocking through the wall. Behind her, Emma lay wide-eyed in the dim, a constellation of blue nightlight stars strewn across the ceiling. Every so often the girl's fingers fluttered, counting, cataloging, trying to make a pattern out of the air. "It's okay," Sarah whispered for the 100th time, the words brittle from use. "You're safe, baby." The phrase came out like a memo, tired from repetition, the syllables measured and competent, which is to say useless. In the faint reflection on the window, Sarah could see a woman boardrooms would recognize, spine straight, jaw set, hair caught into something decisive. But the mirror of the glass also showed the small figure on the bed, and that reflection undid her posture. She crossed the room, adjusted the weighted blanket an inch, another inch, the ritual that was supposed to anchor Emma's body to the idea of rest. The girl's breathing held and stuttered and held again, the way a Wi-Fi bar dances at the edge of signal. The building sighed, an almost silent exhale as the ventilation cycled. Somewhere below, an elevator hummed, cables whispering. It was just past 2. On the kitchen counter, Sarah's phone pulsed with an email flagged red. Investors, Q3 variants. She stared until the words blurred. She had learned to carry crises like folders, stack them, label them, move them from hand to hand so they didn't feel like they were burning. But there are fires you can't hold. "Close your eyes," she said softly. "Just for 10 minutes. Emma blinked twice, a solemn negotiation she didn't complete. The next sound arrived so faintly Sarah thought she was remembering it rather than hearing it. A single note, low and rounded, as if a bottle had been blown across the mouth by a careful breath. She lifted her head. Another note followed, then a patient third, arranging themselves into a skeleton of melody. Not music from a device. There was no tinny edge, no digital sheen. This was a human voice somewhere in the body of the building, a baritone worn smooth by use, moving without hurry along a line Sarah almost recognized and then didn't, because recognition would have required sleep. "Do you hear that?" she said, not sure whether she was speaking to Emma or to the room. Emma's fingers stopped their counting. Her gaze shifted from the ceiling to the vent above the bookshelf, the tiny crosshatch where conditioned air arrived as an abstraction. The voice below, "No, through," continued, not words so much as vowel and breath, the shapes you sing to babies before language gets in the way. It threaded itself through metal and space, softened by distance, and arrived in the room like warm air. Sarah froze. The instinct to control kicked first. Is that maintenance? At this hour? Who's on our floor? She took a step toward the door, then stopped when she heard Emma's breath change. It was impossibly small, the difference between a held note and a released one. The girl's chest let go. Her shoulders dropped half a finger's width. The fingers that had been cataloging the air settled against the blanket, palm open, a decision. Sarah's own throat prickled. The melody didn't announce itself. It went on doing what it was doing, a steady calibration. Sarah stood suspended in the doorway between the room and the hall, afraid of breaking the circuit with a footfall. Absurd, she told herself. Air moves. Sound moves. But the fear was not rational. It was ritual. As old as the first night, she learned that stillness was sometimes the only thing she could offer. The building breathed again, and the voice tucked itself into that breath, curving down into a cadence like the long exhale at the end of a day. Emma's eyes, still open, lost their shine at the edges, as if the light were stepping back from them. Her jaw relaxed. A tiny sound left her lips, not a word, not quite a hum, just an answer. The stars on the ceiling drifted. Sarah felt the math of the last 72 hours begin to unwrite itself. The calls, the strategies, the tight circle of failure she had been pacing. It broke at the seam with that small sound from the bed. "Okay," Sarah whispered, and this time the word had gravity. She reached to switch the nightlight to its lowest setting, but left it half-turned, unwilling to alter the constellation more than a fraction. In the hall, the refrigerator clicked. Somewhere below, a cartwheel rolled, paused, rolled again, a rhythm under the rhythm of the song. She didn't move until Emma's eyelids slid down and stayed. Even then she waited for the test her daughter's body sometimes gave sleep, the sudden startle, the search, the eyes snapping open in accusation. It didn't come. Breath after breath, the regular kind, domestic and unremarkable, stacked up in the air between them like proofs. Sarah realized she had been holding her own air hostage. She let it go, quiet, so the release would not jar whatever mechanism had engaged. The voice receded a degree, not away so much as gentler, matching its volume to the room it had repaired. Sarah made it 3 steps into the hall before she had to lean a hand against the cool wall, not from dizziness, but from the shift in weight. How quickly a life can feel different when one person finally sleeps. The phone on the counter buzzed again. Investors. She flipped the screen face down and stood there, palm to paint, listening to the end of a lullaby that was nobody's job and everybody's salvation. When the last note dissolved into the building's breath, the silence that followed wasn't the expensive hush of glass and air. It was earned quiet, the kind that makes a home out of an address. Sarah straightened, went back to Emma, and watched her sleep the way you watch dawn through a window, still, grateful, unwilling to blink. Only then, in a voice so low it belonged to the dark, did she say thank you to no one she could name and to the someone, somewhere, whose voice had found its way up through steel and ducked to her child. By the next morning, the city's glass towers glittered as if nothing in them had ever trembled, and Sarah wore her executive mask like armor. The boardroom was all polished stone and filtered light, a place designed to project control. She spoke through quarterly numbers, through projections, through the certainty of a woman who had learned that doubt costs more than mistakes. Only the faint ache behind her eyes betrayed the night's fragile reprieve. She had slept 2 hours at most, watching Emma's steady breath and fearing the voice that soothed it would vanish if she dared to close her own eyes. When the meeting adjourned, Sarah walked back into the private corridor leading to her suite of offices. 2 security men trailed half a step behind, more shadow than presence. She stopped abruptly. "There was singing on the executive floor last night," she said. The statement was flat, the way she delivered any performance review. "Find the source and stop it." One guard nodded, tapping the note into his tablet. "Yes, ma'am." It was not anger that drove her order, but the instinct to eliminate variables. A CEO doesn't allow the unpredictable into the structure she builds. Music leaking through vents, emotions she can't regulate. If it helped Emma, that was accident, not policy. Accidents could not be trusted. She pressed her thumb to the biometric scanner and stepped into her office, shutting the directive behind her. Far below, Marcus leaned his mop against the gleaming corridor wall. The supervisor's voice had been measured, apologetic even. "We had a request from upstairs. No more singing during rounds. It's not part of the job description." Marcus nodded once, letting the words land like stones in a pond, ripples fading outward. He didn't argue. Argument never paid a light bill. "Understood," he said quietly. The mop squeaked as he resumed his path down the hall. His baritone had been company to himself more than anyone else, a habit left over from nights in small clubs before children and rent and the need for reliable wages. He had thought, no, he had noticed, that the building carried sound in a way that softened the edges, made the songs feel less his and more everyone's. Apparently, someone disagreed. Rules were rules, and he had 2 reasons at home never to test them. At lunch, he sat with his son Tyler, the boy swinging his legs under the cafeteria table. Tyler chattered about math problems and recess soccer, but Marcus only half heard, still tracing the silence left by his own absent voice. He smiled when required, nodded at the right places. A father provides steadiness, he reminded himself, not complaints about bosses or orders. He chewed each bite with patience and swallowed down the taste of compromise. Upstairs, Sarah sipped from a porcelain cup she didn't remember pouring. The surface of the coffee trembled when she set it down too hard. Emma had survived the day with minimal protest, the teachers reported, but Sarah knew what the night ahead would be like without the anomaly that had settled her child's body. She pressed 2 fingers against her temple. Leadership meant removing the irrational, even if a small part of her wanted to ask the guards to let it slide. Professionalism demanded clarity, not hope. Down in the service corridors, Marcus pushed his cart past ducts that hummed with conditioned air. He didn't hum back. The silence followed him like a reprimand he hadn't earned. The second night, without the voice stretched thin, like fabric pulled too tight across a frame. Emma tossed beneath the weighted blanket, her small fists clenching and unclenching as though sleep were a thing she had to wrestle. Sarah sat cross-legged at the edge of the bed, whispering stories she couldn't finish, promises she didn't believe. Her throat burned from the effort of speaking into the void. By 3 a.m, every tactic had failed. The lavender spray, the familiar toy with worn stitching, the quiet rocking in her arms. Emma's head jerked against her shoulder, eyes wild, lips pressed into a line that refused peace. Sarah's own body swayed with exhaustion, not rhythm, but survival. When Emma finally slid free and lay staring at the ceiling, Sarah pressed her palms to her face and swallowed the sob that threatened to escape. Crying wouldn't help. Crying had never helped. At dawn, she wrapped herself in another suit, another armor, and drove to headquarters on autopilot. The mirrored elevator doors showed a woman perfectly assembled, but the moment she stepped onto the executive floor, the illusion cracked. An assistant greeted her with a cheerful report, and Sarah's reply came out sharper than intended. "Reschedule it. I don't care when." The assistant's smile faltered. Sarah closed her eyes for half a second, heard the echo of her own tone, and hated it. She hated the way exhaustion sharpened her edges until they cut everyone in reach. The day collapsed into meetings and metrics, each conversation a rehearsal of certainty she no longer felt. At lunch, she sat alone at her desk, fork idle against the salad she didn't touch. Numbers swam on her laptop screen. She rubbed the bridge of her nose, but the headache clung, stubborn as her daughter's wakefulness. She told herself to endure. She had endured worse: board takeovers, market crashes, betrayals in conference rooms. But this helplessness in her own home, was a different battlefield. That evening, the house carried a silence more oppressive than noise. The nightlight painted the ceiling with stars again, but Emma's eyes tracked them like enemies. Sarah knelt beside her bed, fingers smoothing hair that refused to calm. "Please, baby," she whispered. "Please close your eyes. Just a little while." Emma whimpered, a sound raw and primal, then kicked free of the blanket. Her body arched in protest, limbs thrashing against invisible restraints. Sarah tried to hold her, but the strength in Emma's panic knocked her backward onto the floor. For a moment, she simply sat there, winded, watching her daughter unravel against the sheets. The sound of Emma's cries filled every corner of the room, bounced off the glass, pressed against Sarah's ears until she thought she might fracture. She crawled back to the bed, wrapping her arms around the small, rigid frame. Emma resisted, then sagged, then stiffened again, a cycle of exhaustion and defiance. "I'm right here," Sarah murmured, though the words felt like lies. Her own tears slipped down, dampening Emma's hair. For once, she didn't bother to hide them. She rocked back and forth, clinging to her child as though the motion could substitute for sleep. In the half-dark, she saw the outline of her empire in reverse. Towers she could not climb, meetings she could not win, a life she could not manage. The night dragged. By morning, neither mother nor daughter had closed their eyes. Sarah staggered into the bathroom, gripping the sink with both hands. Her reflection showed a woman hollowed by failure. She whispered to the mirror, "I can't keep this up." Then, squaring her shoulders, she dressed again, painted strength onto her face, and walked back into the world that believed she was unbreakable. The afternoon sun cut long bars of light across the schoolyard, catching on the chain-link fence and the glossy swing seats that hung still now that the last bell had rung. Marcus waited where he always did, leaning against the hood of his dented sedan, cap pulled low, uniform shirt still carrying the scent of bleach and polish. He spotted Tyler before the boy saw him, a mop of hair bouncing as he raced down the steps, backpack straps slipping off his shoulders with every stride. "Dad," Tyler called, breathless from running. He launched himself into Marcus's side with the trust only a child carries, and Marcus steadied him with a hand on the shoulder. "We had math drills today. I got all of them right. Mrs. Howard said I was the fastest." Marcus smiled, pride warming the fatigue etched into his features. Fastest, huh? Guess that means you'll be teaching me soon. I was never much good at math. He ruffled Tyler's hair and opened the passenger door. The boy climbed in, buckling with the care of practiced habit, then turned serious. Why'd you stop singing at night? The question dropped into the car's interior with more weight than a child's voice usually carried. Marcus paused, one hand still on the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the windshield. What makes you ask that? Tyler fiddled with the zipper on his backpack, hesitant but insistent. Because I heard you. Not in our place. At school, in the vents. It sounded like you. And he looked up, his gaze sharp. Emma slept when you did. She told me. Said the song made the bad nights not so bad. Marcus's breath caught. The puzzle pieces slid into place. The hum of ducks, the way sound traveled through old buildings, the executive floor perched just above his nightly rounds. He saw it then with startling clarity, his voice drifting upward through steel and air, reaching the child who lived in the tower, the child who hadn't been sleeping. Emma, he repeated softly, the name fitting now. He remembered glimpsing her once, a small girl pressed close to her mother's side in the lobby, eyes scanning everything but never settling. He hadn't known his voice could cross that distance, hadn't known it mattered. Dad, Tyler prompted, worried by his silence. Marcus turned, laid a hand over his son's. Sometimes when you do something, you don't realize who else it helps. I was just trying to keep myself company, you know? But it sounds like somebody upstairs needed it more. Tyler's face brightened, relief loosening his small shoulders. So you'll sing again? Marcus hesitated. The supervisor's warning echoed in his head, not part of the job description. Rules meant wages, and wages meant food on the table, shoes on his boy's growing feet. But alongside that calculation came the image of a girl finally closing her eyes, and of her mother, though Marcus didn't know her story, perhaps catching a fragment of peace. He started the car, the engine coughing into life. We'll see, he said carefully, but already the decision had begun to form. Some rules protect order, others just protect power. And sometimes breaking one means giving a child, 2 children, maybe, what they need most. As they pulled away from the school, Tyler hummed the first line of a tune Marcus had once sung over dishwater and laundry. Without thinking, Marcus joined in, his baritone filling the small space, warm and steady. Tyler leaned back against the seat, eyes closing as if the world made more sense this way. And Marcus, glancing once at his son, thought of the girl in the tower who had not slept in days and knew the risk might be worth it. The building was never more his than in the late hours, when polished floors gleamed without footsteps and the air hummed with nothing but circulation. Marcus moved his cart along the executive corridor, the wheels whispering against marble. He had wiped down the glass panels until they shone, emptied bins that held scraps of meetings he'd never attend, and replaced the paper in dispensers that no one noticed until it ran out. Invisible work, that was the contract. Stay useful, stay unseen. But tonight, as he paused outside a set of double doors, the silence pressed too hard against his chest. Tyler's words replayed, Emma slept when you did. Marcus rested both hands on the mop handle and closed his eyes. He could hear his supervisor's caution as clearly as if the man stood beside him. No more singing during rounds. A paycheck meant stability. Stability meant Tyler could keep excelling, keep being proud of a father who showed up. And yet, some rules didn't deserve obedience. Some silences didn't deserve to be kept. He leaned the mop against the wall, drew a steadying breath, and let the first note rise. It came out low, almost tentative, but it carried, folding into the corridor's acoustics. The marble lent resonance, the ducts lifted it upward, and suddenly the sound wasn't small anymore. It belonged to the building, to whoever might be listening in the dark above. Marcus shaped the melody carefully, no words at first, just the open vowels that wrapped around a room like a blanket. The song was one he knew by heart, a tune his grandmother had sung on porches when the world outside was harsh, and the only thing to do was rock back and forth until morning came. He sang softly but without apology. Far above, in a penthouse bedroom, Emma stirred under her blanket. Her fingers, tense for nights, loosened their grip on the sheets. Her breath shifted, the jagged rhythm smoothing as if someone had adjusted the dial of her body. She turned toward the vent, lips parting, as though catching a secret meant only for her. Marcus didn't know this, couldn't see the transformation, but he trusted it. He trusted that the sound found its way where it was needed. For a moment, he let his eyes close, leaning back against the wall, the song spilling out like water that had been dammed too long. The corridor seemed to breathe with him. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, the ventilation joined in a hushed counterpoint, and his voice rode above it, steady as a metronome. He imagined a child, no name spoken, no details needed, resting easier because he had broken a rule. That was enough justification. He finished the verse not with a flourish, but with a long exhale, a tone that dwindled until silence folded back over the hallway. His pulse raced, but not from fear, from resolve. Somewhere in the quiet, Marcus knew a little girl might finally be asleep. And for that, he would risk whatever consequence tomorrow held. Sarah sat in the half-light of Emma's room, exhaustion pulling at every joint. She had stopped trying to soothe with words. Her voice had lost its authority in the presence of her daughter's relentless wakefulness. Then, like a thread weaving through the vents, the song returned. It was unmistakable, that baritone softened by distance, a tone neither mechanical nor rehearsed. Emma's restless body eased as though gravity itself had shifted. Her breathing slowed. Sarah's chest tightened with something like relief, but it was laced with indignation too. She had given an order. Orders weren't suggestions. She rose, careful not to wake the child, and crossed to the elevator. Each mirrored panel reflected a woman caught between roles: CEO, mother, enforcer, supplicant. As the doors closed, the lullaby swelled faintly through the shaft, following her descent. The executive corridor was deserted except for Marcus, mop set aside, voice carrying through marble and glass. He didn't see her at first. His eyes were half-lidded, body swaying slightly in rhythm, as if the song steadied him as much as anyone who heard it. Stop. The word came sharper than she intended, echoing against the polished walls. Marcus's voice cut off mid-phrase. He straightened, shoulders squared, face composed into professional neutrality. Ma'am. Sarah folded her arms, as though posture could cover the tremor in her voice. I gave explicit instructions. No singing. He met her gaze evenly, though not defiant. Yes, ma'am. I remember. His tone carried neither apology nor challenge, only fact. Then why? She pressed. Her words were steel, but beneath them was the memory of Emma's first untroubled breath in days. Marcus hesitated, then said quietly, because someone needed it. The simplicity of the statement cut through the air. Sarah's instinct was to argue policy, professionalism, liability, but her throat closed on the words. Instead, she asked, softer, you know my daughter? Only by sound, Marcus replied. I've never met her, but I know what it is when a child can't rest. His voice dipped, carrying a weight she hadn't expected. I've lived through nights like that with my own boy. Sarah's jaw tightened. Vulnerability was a currency she rarely spent, but something in his calm pressed her to speak. She hasn't slept in nearly a week. Doctors, therapies, all of it, and nothing worked. Until she stopped, swallowing. The admission cost more than she thought it would. Marcus inclined his head, no triumph in his expression, only understanding. Sometimes it isn't about medicine. Sometimes it's just about being held in sound. Silence filled the corridor, not empty but charged, the way a room feels after a truth has been spoken. Sarah looked at him, really looked, and saw not a janitor breaking rules, but a father who had chosen compassion over compliance. She drew a long breath. Come with me, she said finally. If you're going to do this, then do it where it matters most. Marcus bent, set the mop neatly against the wall, and followed her into the waiting elevator. Neither spoke on the ride up. The song had stopped, but the air carried the echo of what it had done. The penthouse was dark except for the spill of the night light casting blue stars across the ceiling. Emma lay restless, her body taut as though even sleep required armor. Sarah paused in the doorway, Marcus just behind her, uncertain but steady. Emma turned her head toward the movement. Her eyes, wide and bright, fixed not on her mother but on the unfamiliar figure who carried no authority, no title, only presence. For a long breath the room held its silence. Then Emma's hand lifted, small fingers stretching toward him. Her lips formed a single word, soft but clear. Sing. The request landed like a command neither corporate nor negotiable. Marcus stepped closer, lowering himself to the edge of the bed as though entering sacred ground. His baritone began low, a thread pulled gently into the air. No lyrics, just sound shaped into comfort, each note slow enough to rest inside. Emma's fists unclenched. Her chest rose and fell with the rhythm of the song, her gaze softening until it slid shut. The tightness in her jaw released. Her body curled into the blanket without struggle. Within moments, she was asleep, breath steady, face unguarded for the first time in days. Sarah stood frozen, hands gripping the doorframe. Tears blurred her vision, but she let them come. She had fought for control in boardrooms and hospitals, but here, in the quiet, it was a janitor's lullaby that returned her daughter to peace. Marcus sang through another verse, gentler now, his voice tapering to a hum, then to silence. He didn't move, as if any sudden shift might undo the fragile miracle. He simply watched Emma breathe, reverence etched into every line of his posture. When Sarah finally stepped forward, she laid a hand on her daughter's hair, then looked at Marcus. Her voice was hoarse. "Thank you." He shook his head lightly, as though the gratitude belonged somewhere else. "It's nothing," he whispered. But the way he remained seated, still and protective, proved it was everything. Together they stood watch in the quiet, a mother and a stranger bound for a moment by the soft rise and fall of a child's breath. When the song faded, the room held a stillness Sarah had almost forgotten existed. Emma's breaths stacked one on top of the other, steady and unbroken, like bricks building a wall against chaos. Sarah touched her daughter's cheek, then straightened, meeting Marcus's eyes. In them she saw not defiance, but quiet steadiness, the kind of strength that didn't need titles. "I was wrong," she said, her voice low so as not to disturb the fragile peace. "About the rules. About everything." She paused, swallowing the pride that usually armored her words. "You've given her what doctors, specialists, and I couldn't. I owe you more than thanks." Marcus shook his head, still seated near the bed. "You don't owe me. I just did what any parent would do if they could." His gaze lingered on Emma for a moment longer before he stood, straightening his uniform. But Sarah didn't let him leave it at that. "No, I owe you better than the night shift and warnings. I want you on days, with better pay. And if you choose to sing in these halls, it will not only be allowed, it will be welcomed." Her words felt strange in her own mouth, but true. Leadership wasn't only about cutting risks. Sometimes it was about embracing them for the sake of humanity. Marcus blinked, then nodded once, slow and deliberate. "That'll make things easier for me and my boy. Thank you." 6 months later, the building carried a different sound. In the mornings, Marcus's voice still drifted through the corridors, but now it was accompanied by greetings from staff who had learned to pause and listen. The man who once pushed a mop now walked the floors as director of facilities, sleeves rolled up, voice steady, presence grounding. In the daycare courtyard, Tyler and Emma played side by side, their laughter rising above the hum of city traffic. Tyler showed her how to kick a ball, just so, and Emma's laugh, rare and bright, echoed back against the glass walls of the tower. Sarah stood watching for a moment before heading to her meeting, the sight more valuable than any quarterly gain. She had not softened. She was still CEO, still decisive, but she had recalibrated. She no longer measured success only by profit margins or board approvals. She measured it in moments like these: a daughter who slept, a building alive with voices, a man who had proven that compassion carried farther than policy. And on nights when the city pressed too hard against the glass, Sarah still found herself pausing by the vent in her office. If she listened closely, she could hear the faint echo of a baritone somewhere in the building, a reminder that sometimes the most important leadership was not control at all, but the courage to let humanity into the system.